I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth.
I don't know what you're talking about.
They locked me away, thinking fear would break me. But fear only sharpened my resolve. Hours passed in silence. The kind of silence that makes you confront who you really are. Every sound, every memory of my husband's voice became a reminder that survival isn't weakness. It's defiance. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about dignity, about standing tall when someone tries to erase you. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video, and do not forget to subscribe the channel. Let's see our global family. I never realized how loud a house could be until it grew quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that lingers after voices fade, after laughter no longer fills the corners. My days had slipped into routines I knew by heart. The kettle whistling at dawn, the curtains pulled back to let in a thin wash of morning light, the slow clink of a spoon in a cup of tea I drank alone. These rituals gave me comfort, though beneath them, something heavier had begun to take root. I was 69 then, old enough to have seen seasons turn and people change, but not old enough to accept indifference as my inheritance. My daughter-in-law had begun moving around me like I was a shadow in her home. Eyes that once softened when I helped with the children now cut sharp, as if weighing my existence. Words that once carried warmth became clipped, each one trimmed of affection until only duty remained. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Stress, fatigue, a young woman trying to hold together a family and a life. I wanted to believe in her goodness, in the idea that family binds stronger than any passing storm. But still, a part of me flinched at the way she set my tea down, not with care, but with impatience. I noticed how her sighs grew longer when I asked for help with something simple. I remember one evening clearly. The children were upstairs, their voices muffled with play. I sat at the dining table knitting, while she moved around the kitchen. I tried to make small talk, asked about her day, but she barely looked up. "It was fine," she said, flat, her hands moving faster as though my words slowed her. I let it go. I always let it go. The truth is, I didn't want to see the cruelty that might be hiding in plain sight. I told myself, she's just tired. She doesn't mean it that way. You're imagining things. That was easier than admitting the distance between us was widening. But silence speaks louder than denial. It grew in the spaces between her footsteps, in the way she closed doors a little too firmly, in how her greetings shrank to nods instead of words. There were moments when she caught me watching her, and her expression changed. Not guilt, not even irritation, but something colder, as if she wished I wasn't there at all. It's a hard thing to feel like a guest in the very house you helped build. I had been there through every hardship, every celebration, every quiet dinner when my son worked late. I held her children when they were newborns, stayed awake through fevers, cooked meals when she was too tired to lift a pan. All of it was given freely out of love, and yet, the way she looked at me now stripped those years down to nothing. One morning, as I poured water into the kettle, she stood by the counter scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I said good morning. The kettle hissed louder, and I thought of how small I had become in this space. "You are invisible now," a voice whispered inside me. I tried to push that thought away, but it followed me through the day. It followed me when I folded the laundry, when I tidied the children's toys, when I set the table for dinner. Everything I did felt unseen, uncounted, as though my presence had shifted from necessary to inconvenient. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The house had grown quieter, yes, but it wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of absence, the absence of kindness, of belonging. And yet, I said nothing. I told myself families have seasons. Relationships bend and then they heal. I wanted to believe it was only a matter of time before her warmth returned, before her glances softened again. But deep down, I knew better. The smallest cracks are the ones that spread the fastest, and though I couldn't see the full shape of it yet, I felt it. The beginning of something that would break more than just the silence of that house. It was a late afternoon. the kind where the light falls heavy and orange across the kitchen tiles. I was making tea, the same way I had every day for years, the rhythm of it familiar, water boiling, leaves steeping, the faint sweetness of cardamom rising into the air. It was supposed to be ordinary, unremarkable, but sometimes the smallest moments carry the weight of what comes next. I had just set the cups on the counter when I heard it, a sharp metallic click from behind me. At first it didn't register. Doors close all the time, locks turn without thought, but something in that sound was deliberate, too certain. My hand froze on the spoon. I turned to the door, tried the handle, and felt the resistance. It didn't budge, I called out softly at first. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. I tried again, louder this time. "Could you open the door?" Still nothing, only the faint hiss of the stove and the distant hum of the refrigerator. A chill ran through me. It wasn't just that the door was locked. It was that someone had locked it, and they hadn't answered when I called. My heart quickened. I knocked harder, called her name. "Can you hear me? Please open the door." But the silence pressed in thicker, heavier. I pressed my ear against the wood, hoping for footsteps, for any sign of movement on the other side. All I heard was stillness. Then faintly I caught the smell. It drifted up from the stove, sharp and unmistakable. Gas. The burners had been left open. My stomach dropped. This wasn't an accident. I moved quickly, fumbling with the knobs, twisting them off one by one. The hiss subsided, but the air was already heavy, poisoned. My chest tightened as I tried to steady my breath. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for a moment. Why? The question hit me harder than the gas itself. Why would she do this? Why would she lock me in, knowing what would happen? The answer wasn't hard to find. I had heard the whispers, the subtle mentions of money, inheritance, accounts. My son had trusted me with what we had built over a lifetime, a fortune that had grown into something larger than I ever imagined. 99 million, enough to tempt even the closest of kin. I pressed my palms against the counter, fighting the tremor in my hands. The betrayal stung more than the gas in my lungs. I had welcomed her into this home, into our family. I had given her trust, care, years of support. And in return, she had locked me away like something disposable, hoping the silence of this kitchen would swallow me whole. I banged on the door again, harder now, anger breaking through my fear. "Open this door!" My voice echoed off the tiled walls, but no one came. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was longer. Time warped in that locked space. The gas clung to the air even after the burners were shut, seeping into me with every breath. My eyes watered, my throat burned. I opened the small window above the sink, but it barely helped. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. I couldn't let her win. I wouldn't let this house become my tomb. I sat down on the chair by the counter, forcing myself to breathe shallow, measured. My mind raced with memories, holding my son's hand on his first day of school, the smile on his face when he told me he'd fallen in love, the day he introduced her as the woman he wanted to marry. All of it had led to this moment, and I couldn't understand how love could curdle into such cruelty. There was a part of me that wanted to cry, to collapse into despair. But another part, the part that had survived decades of hardship, of loss, of quiet endurance, kept me upright. I thought of my late husband, his words echoing in memory. "You don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you broken." I wiped my eyes and steadied my breath. I wasn't broken, not yet. The hours stretched on. The air grew heavy, but I clung to each breath like it was an act of defiance. I tapped my fingers against the counter to keep myself awake, to remind myself I was still here, still alive, and in that suffocating silence, one truth settled deep inside me. This was no longer just about money. This was about survival, about showing her, and maybe even myself, that I could endure the kind of betrayal that strips the soul raw. I sat there in that locked kitchen, gas still lingering in the air, the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, and yet, somewhere beneath the fear, a quiet resolve began to take shape. When she came back, whenever that would be, she wouldn't find me weak or broken. She would find me waiting. Time bent strangely in that kitchen. Seconds stretched into long corridors of thought, and every tick of the clock carried the weight of a verdict. My hand pressed against the counter, steadying me against the tremor in my body. Breathing shallow, I forced myself to stay upright, to resist the panic that clawed at my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. At 69, my days should have been filled with gardens and quiet breakfasts, not the suffocating stench of gas leaking into the air. Yet here I was, locked in the room I had cooked in for decades, suddenly a prisoner in my own home. My fingers shook as I reached for the knobs, twisting each burner off with deliberate precision. One by one, the flames disappeared until the silence afterward pressed against my ears. That silence was more terrifying than the hiss of gas. It was a silence thick with intention, with cruelty, with the realization that this wasn't a careless act. My husband's voice surfaced in my mind, uninvited but steady, like a hand reaching back through time. Survival is its own form of defiance, he had once told me, long ago, when we were struggling to pay the mortgage, when the world felt too heavy for our tired shoulders. Back then, his words had been comfort. Now they became a command. I leaned into that memory, into the strength he had carried quietly until the day he died. He would never have imagined his wife standing here decades later, calculating whether her own daughter-in-law had just tried to kill her. But the truth seeped in, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't about a bad mood. This wasn't about impatience. It was about money. The trust my husband left behind. $99 million tied up in investments, real estate, and accounts I had never asked for but always guarded with care. I had believed it was a safety net for the family, a gift for the generations that followed. I never thought it would turn me into a target. But now, standing in that heavy silence, it became clear. She hadn't just wanted me quiet. She had wanted me gone. I sat down at the edge of the kitchen table, my legs too weak to carry me further. My mind raced, pulling at threads I had ignored for months. The sharp glances, the clipped tones, the way she had started managing who came into the house and who didn't. Even the way my son had grown more distant, repeating phrases that didn't sound like his own. It was all part of the same picture. I had brushed it aside, told myself I was being sensitive, old-fashioned, or maybe just lonely. But now I saw it clearly. I had been living under siege without naming it. The refrigerator hummed behind me, a low mechanical sound that anchored me back to the moment. My hand reached for a glass of water, and I swallowed it slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I could not collapse. If I did, she would win. The door behind me rattled faintly. Her voice came, soft and casual, as though nothing had happened. "Are you all right in there?" I didn't answer. My throat locked around the words, not from fear, but from restraint. If I spoke too soon, if I revealed the depth of what I now understood, I would lose the one advantage I had left: silence. Instead, I sat in stillness, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hall. My mind began building a new rhythm, one not of daily chores or quiet routines, but of survival. I would need to be careful now, observant. I could not afford another mistake, another blind spot. I thought of the women I had known in my life, the ones who had carried grief and betrayal in silence. My mother, who endured a marriage of indifference. My neighbor, who buried her disappointments in long afternoons of knitting. I had promised myself I would never live like that I would speak when something was wrong. Yet here I was, forced into silence. But this silence was not surrender. This silence was strategy. I stood again, steadier now. I checked the burners once more, confirming they were off. I touched the edges of the counter, the worn wood I had leaned against for years, and I felt something shift inside me. This house had been my prison tonight, but it was also my proof. I knew what had happened. I knew what she had tried to do. And knowledge, I realized, was the first weapon I had picked up in this war I never asked for. I whispered to myself, almost too softly to hear, "Not yet. You won't take me yet." The air felt thinner now, easier to breathe. The fear was still there, but beneath it pulsed something harder, sharper, a determination that had been buried for too long. I would survive. And in surviving, I would expose her. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It had become the space where my resolve was born. When the air cleared and my pulse steadied, I didn't rush to escape. I sat in that locked kitchen with the lights dim, the house silent, and let the hours move across me like slow tides. The minutes no longer scared me. They became my shield. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was something colder, sharper, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who worked 2 jobs while raising my son. The one who stood beside my husband when banks threatened to take our home. I had faced storms before, and each one had carved me into someone harder to break. But life has a way of softening you over time, until you forget the steel in your bones. Tonight, she had reminded me. By the time evening shadows stretched across the tiles, I knew what I had to do. Survival alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed to reclaim something deeper, my dignity. I found a chair and dragged it slowly across the floor, the scrape deliberate, as if announcing my decision to the walls. I positioned it by the door, my body steady, my hands folded on my lap. I wasn't going to call the police just yet, nor shout for help. No, this betrayal deserved something quieter. When she returned, I wanted her to see not fear, not defeat, but the steadiness of the woman she had underestimated. My breathing slowed into rhythm with the ticking clock. I sat upright, every muscle alert, but my expression calm. Years of holding my tongue at family dinners had prepared me for this kind of silence. It was no longer a cage, it was a weapon. The hallway outside creaked once, then again. Her footsteps approached, light and measured, the way someone walks when they think they're in control. I kept my eyes on the door, the handle turned. The lock clicked. Slowly, the door swung open, spilling a faint slice of hallway light into the room. She stood there, her face carefully composed, but her eyes flickered when they met mine. "You've been quiet," she said, almost testing the ground. I didn't answer. I sat still, my hands folded neatly, like a teacher waiting for a late student to explain themselves. The silence stretched, bending the space between us until she shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, stripped of any tremor. "I know what you tried to do." Her lips parted, but no words came. She blinked once, quickly, and then forced a small laugh. "You're imagining things. You've been under stress." "No," I said, sharper now. "I am old, but I am not blind. And I am not weak." The room felt smaller then, as if the air itself leaned in to listen. Her posture stiffened. I could see the calculations in her eyes, the search for excuses, for the right mask to wear. But I had lived long enough to recognize when someone had already revealed their truth. I didn't list the gas, the door, the money. I didn't need to. Naming them would have given her ground to argue. What mattered was the shift. That she now knew I saw her, truly saw her, without illusion. I leaned forward slightly, my hands still folded. "You wanted me gone, but I am still here, and now you will have to live with that." For a moment her face cracked. Anger flared, quick and raw, before she caught it and smoothed it away. She muttered something about rest, about confusion, but her voice carried no conviction. She left the doorway, her footsteps sharper this time, each one striking like a gavel down the hall. I remained seated, letting the weight of the exchange settle into my bones. The house grew quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of control, reclaimed piece by piece. I knew this wasn't the end. People like her didn't surrender easily. She would try again, in ways more subtle, more careful. But she had lost something tonight. The illusion that I was powerless. I stayed in that chair long after the door closed, watching the thin line of light beneath it. My body ached, but I welcomed the discomfort. Pain reminded me I was alive, still capable, still unbroken. When I finally rose, I didn't stumble. I moved with intention, checking the windows, the locks, the small details I had once taken for granted. Every movement was quiet preparation, not panic. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I caught my own face. Older, lined with years, but with eyes sharper than I remembered. For the first time in a long while, I didn't just see a widow, a grandmother, a woman fading into the background. I saw the survivor my husband had always known I was. And as I turned away from the glass, I whispered into the silence. You chose the wrong enemy. The words weren't for her ears. They were for mine. A vow, a reminder, a beginning. The sound of the front door unlocking felt like a blade drawn from its sheath. I heard her heels strike the floor, quick, purposeful. She thought she was walking back into silence, into the victory of a plan completed. But when the kitchen door swung open, there I sat, upright, eyes clear, as though I had been expecting her all along. The look on her face cracked something in the air. Surprise, then disbelief, then the faint shadow of fear. For a moment she froze in the doorway. I could almost see her mind racing, trying to reconcile the picture she had built in her head with the reality in front of her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I only asked her one question, simple and heavy. Why? Her lips parted, but no sound came. She looked away, then back at me, as if searching for a version of me that was weaker, easier to dismiss. But the silence pressed down on her like weight, thick and undeniable. She stepped into the room, her heels softer now, her breath shallow. You've misunderstood, she said quickly, too quickly. I didn't mean, don't lie, I interrupted. My voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, flat, a line drawn in sand. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time she looked small. The walls she built around herself, arrogance, control, coldness, they all seemed thinner in that moment. She had power when she thought I was weak, but strength unsettled her. I leaned forward slightly, my hands still folded. Why? I repeated. She swallowed hard. A flicker of anger crossed her face, then shame, then something like desperation. It was supposed to be simple, she whispered. You wouldn't understand, I held her gaze. Try me, her shoulders tightened. She looked at the floor, at the counter, anywhere but my eyes. The money, she finally muttered. You sit on it while the rest of us struggle. You cling to it like it's your breath. I thought it was wasted on you. The words cut deeper than I expected, not because of greed, but because of what they revealed. How little she had ever seen me, how easily she reduced my life to numbers on paper. That money, I said quietly, wasn't mine to hoard. It was meant for the family, for the ones who come after, for the people I thought I could trust. She flinched, and in that small motion, I saw her realize the truth. She had not just betrayed me, but the very foundation she wanted to control. The silence returned, heavy and sharp. She shifted her weight, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. I didn't need to accuse her further. She already stood convicted by her own confession. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen, once suffocating with danger, now felt like a stage where roles had reversed. She no longer looked like the orchestrator of a plan. She looked like the one cornered, exposed under a light she couldn't dim. You thought you could erase me, I said, softer now, almost like a reflection. But I'm still here, and you'll have to live with that. Her face hardened, defensive. You don't know what it's like, she snapped. Always in your shadow, always waiting for scraps. I wanted more. I let her words hang in the air, heavy with their own emptiness. Then I stood slowly, my body stiff but unbroken. Greed is never more, I said. It is only less. Less trust, less family, less soul. The look she gave me then was not one of victory, but of defeat cloaked in anger. She turned quickly, muttering something under her breath, and left the room with footsteps that no longer sounded like power. I remained where I was, breathing steady, my chest rising with a strange calm. The question why had not given me comfort, but it had stripped away any illusion. I saw her clearly now, without excuses, without masks. And clarity, even when painful, is a form of freedom. The house fell silent again, but it wasn't the silence of being trapped. It was the silence of choices yet to be made. I knew the confrontation had only opened the door to a harder road. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to walk it. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway. My steps were slow but certain. The night was no longer hers. It was mine. The days that followed were not about revenge. They were about truth. After years of silence, of avoiding conflict, of letting things slide to keep peace, I realized there were moments when peace itself became a lie. This was one of them. When my son returned, the house felt heavier than usual. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes darting between me and the emptiness left behind by the woman he thought he knew. His voice was uncertain, careful. "Mother, what happened?" I didn't rush. I sat him down at the table where so many meals had been shared, where life had unfolded in its quiet routines. My voice was steady, stripped of bitterness. "She tried to erase me," I told him. "Not just from this house, but from your life, from our family." He didn't believe me at first. I saw it in the way his brows furrowed, the way he searched for softer explanations. But as I laid out the details piece by piece, something in his face changed. The disbelief gave way to pain, and then to anger. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He simply nodded, the weight of truth sinking into him like a stone into water. Papers followed soon after. Accounts checked, signatures verified, intentions revealed for what they were. My daughter-in-law's plans unraveled in the clear light of scrutiny. The $99 million remained where it always had, in trust, protected, untouchable by greed. But the illusion of harmony in this household was gone. She left not as a victor, but as someone who had gambled her future and lost. There was no dramatic farewell, no tearful apology, just the sound of a suitcase rolling across the tiles, the front door closing behind her, and the silence that filled the space she had occupied. I stayed. In the same rooms, with the same routines. The kettle still whistled at dawn. The curtains still opened to the light. The floorboards still creaked under my steps. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but within me, everything had. Trust, I realized, was far more fragile than I had allowed myself to believe. It could fracture quietly, without warning, even within the walls of family. That truth sat heavy on me, not as bitterness, but as clarity. At night, I would sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I thought about the years behind me, about the people I had trusted, the people I had lost, and the ones who had stayed. My $99 million was still mine, yes, but it no longer felt like the center of the story. What mattered more was the fact that I had endured, that I had refused to disappear when someone tried to write me out of my own life. One evening, my son joined me by the window. He stood quietly for a while before speaking. "I don't know how to make this right," he admitted. "You don't need to," I told him. "Some things cannot be made right. They can only be lived through." He looked at me, his face heavy with regret, and I placed my hand over his. "Learn from it," I added softly. "That is enough." The house was quieter now, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the suffocating silence of fear, but the calm gravity of survival. Every creak, every hum of the refrigerator, every whistle of the kettle reminded me that I was still here. Present, whole. Survival had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't just about breath in my lungs or food on my plate. It was about dignity. The ability to face betrayal and still stand. To look at myself in the mirror and see someone unbroken. I thought about inheritance, about what I would leave behind when my time was over. The money, the house, the small treasures collected over a lifetime. They were all just objects. What I truly wanted to pass on was something quieter, the resilience to endure, the strength to stay standing when the world tried to push you down, the knowledge that survival itself is a kind of victory, and so I carried on, not triumphantly, not bitterly, but with a steady calm. I cooked my meals. I folded my laundry. I tended to the small rituals that had always given shape to my days. They were no longer habits. They were affirmations, reminders that I remained, that I had not been erased. In the stillness of those evenings, I felt no triumph. I felt no bitterness. I felt only the steady pulse of life continuing, and the deep, quiet satisfaction of having faced the attempt to erase me and having endured. Survival, I realized, was not just my story. It was my gift, my inheritance. And as I sat alone in the house that had tried to become my tomb, I whispered a truth meant for no one but myself. I am still here. And that was my story. Tell me in the comments, how did it make you feel? If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for the next one.